Hi, welcome to the bathtub. When you don't hear any music at all, you know it's just another throw-off edition episode, which I don't know what I'm doing with it exactly, but I know what the subject is, and we don't really have a theme song this week. I didn't even close the door, so can't hear it. This is I know what this is. This is the birthday shirt. This is the birthday shirt edition. My wife got me this birthday shirt, so I look a lot better than I normally do on this stupid show. And today we're going to talk very briefly about an old buddy of mine and writer. I'm rediscovering. Basically, you either read or you rediscover books, and it's Avram Davidson with one of his worst looking books, Clash of Star Kings. Now, is that going to send you? You're going to just throw it? That's just going to be a joke if you see that in the bookshop. One of his best books, one of his better books. I really enjoyed this, and I read this recently. I read this I tried reading it when I was a kid. I don't know if I finished it or not. I had trouble following it when I was 15 or 16 when I first met Avram. But Avram was quite fond of this. And I want to talk a few things briefly about it. Again, as I try to tell you every episode, almost all my facts are they're half facts. They're kind of like stuff I sort of remember, and I haven't quite double-checked most of them. But as I recall, I remember Avram talking about this book, and there's another one of his books. Oh, there it is. The Karchi Rain. I never read this one. Another double. These old ace doubles, the old digest-sized ace doubles. Are those like? Isn't that cool? Isn't that just a cool book? And when I knew Avram, he said that he had written this book while he was living in Mexico. We're going to give a shout out, by the way, to our friend Seth Davis, Avram's godson, who I'm pretty sure I saw wandering around in his underpants when I used to go to Avram's classes. And I won't tell anybody, Seth, I promise. But Seth is doing a wonderful series of audio books on Avram's books. He's got some websites, and I'm going to put a link below so you can check out and he also does a much better job of checking his facts than I'm going to do. When I knew Avram in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, when I first knew him, and I knew him for many years after that, he often said that this was a time when he thought he'd finally found a way to make a living. Avram always walked around. He looked. My friend Tom did. Every time I think of Tom, he said he kind of looked like a homeless person sometimes when you saw Avram. He would wear like 3 sweaters, and there would always be holes on everything. And he was always trying to find ways to live without having to work, which is basically that's the job of writers. Get your meals taken care of and don't work. And Avram found a way. He was editing the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. We're going to talk more about this in a minute. And he went to live in Mexico, somewhere in the boondocks of Mexico. I want to say Mac Reynolds, a writer who I sort of know from that period, was a friend of theirs, and he was already living in Mexico. And Avram and his wife, Grania Davis, Seth's mom, a lovely lady, wonderful writer, they went to Mexico because they thought it was cheap to live. And Avram had found a deal with Donald A. Wollheim who was doing the Ace books, where he could write this book. It was like 40. Avram actually describes like 40,000 words. You could write a novel in 40,000 words, 45,000 words, and you could get. I remember him saying $500 for writing this novel, and he could write that book, and he could live for 2 or 3 months in Mexico on this book. And he thought he was going to go down there and just write a book every 3 or 4 months, and everything was going to be fine. And it turned out it didn't work out. It never does work out, does it? And so he was always looking for places to work and write, and it's a shame he never got as much readership as he should have gotten. But anyway, he would publish these books, and he wrote this book, really unusual, completely misrepresented by the cover and the title. The original title, as Avram told me, was TLALOC, TLALOC. And I haven't even remembered to look this up. He's a rain god, a god of rain in Aztec mythology. Is that right? I don't remember. But anyway, he's sort of the central image around which this book orbits. I started reading it this time, and again, you have to get through this kind of dense and information-rich prose of Avram's, which is also very funny. So almost every sentence you'll get like 2 or 3 bits of information, a couple of amazing images, and a joke. It's a lot of stuff happening sometimes, and a lot of characters start going through this. So there's all these different characters, and the central characters are these two writers and the one writer's wife, who sort of slightly resemble Avram, Davidson, and Grania, and his and then maybe Matt Reynolds type. And they live as cheap as they can in some little rundown place in the middle of nowhere. And they're trying to write their books and write their stories. And in the midst of them, there's so many different imaginative things happening around them. So everything happens very quickly. And it starts off that there's a sort of kind of coyote-like werewolf race of people, and then there's again, Avram kind of assimilates history incredibly quickly, and in his brain he seemed to do it, and then he seems to put it back onto the page, and so he understands and has learned a lot about the kind of anti-Catholic governmental activity in Mexico, and a lot of the popular affection for Catholicism, and the creation of their own saints and their own local religions. And in the middle of all of this, there's a local saint, and there's a buried god somewhere in the mountains. And I don't want to give too much away because you have to really kind of follow it. A lot of different things happen quickly. There's never any sort of your standard science fiction spaceships coming down, though there are lights up on the top of a volcano. And the course of the book moves very, very fast. Every sentence is a lot of fun. You have to really pay attention. Stylistically, Avram is totally unique. Can't think of anybody who really writes as sharply and coagulates. There's so much coagulated in every sentence, and you have to really give yourself up to it a bit, but you also have to focus continuously. So anyway, this book, which was they just called Clash of Star Kings, it was one of those things that publishers did for science fiction books. They just slammed it on there, what the hell, and they didn't really care what they called it. Anyway, it's a wonderful book, really fun to read. It was published, there's other editions of the book, but the original one and the proper title is TLALOC, and I enjoyed it very much. I want to talk a little bit more. When I brought this up somewhere, maybe on Seth's page, somebody said, "Oh, that was the best written ace double." They're probably right. I don't know. I think it's awfully good. It's awfully well written, but it's an amazing little place because look at all there's a lot of great writers published their first books in the ace doubles. Look at this one. This one has that's the first Ursula K. Le Guin novel, Rocannon's World. I don't think I read it. I mean, there's Avram's other book. One of my favorite. This is probably my favorite ace double, which is Tom Dish's Mankind Under the Leash. Tom's preferred title was White Fang Goes Dingo, which is, again, you have a guy, some furry-faced guy on the cover. It's a satire on religion, on Catholic religion. The notion that you're going to be translated into some better world. It's hilarious, and it's very funny, and it's also, who else could have written a book, a takeoff on David Copperfield and White Fang? That's basically, and then the science fiction element. Tom Dish. Planet of Exile, another Ursula K. Le Guin book. Look at this. We talked about James White. I haven't read this. I bought this recently. Second Ending. I think it's James White's first novel. Don't quote me. And on the other side, Samuel R. Delaney's first novel was an ace double. So, there's a lot of amazing stuff in those ace doubles. We'll talk about some of those. Anyway, the other thing I started to do in the past few weeks, I'm still drinking my Manhattan from what I'm sure will be a fraught episode I did last one about banned books. About a month or two ago, I go on eBay because I have nothing else to do all day, and I saw a list for something like 11 volumes of fantasy and science fiction from the year 1964. This was the last year Avram Davidson edited the magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. And they were on for like $15. And I debated. I wrote a few people said, you got to buy these because I'm going to buy them if you don't buy them. And I said, the last thing I need is a whole bunch of old F&SFs. I like this magazine, but I can't start buying these. And I ended up buying them. They're all in really good shape. Avram was a wonderful editor. He was a very bright, interesting guy. And I went and got the whole year. This is his last year when he was probably already moving to Mexico. And I just said, what the hell, I'm going to read through the 3 years that Avram did Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. And just to tell it really quickly, I only read the first one, which is December 1963. It's a wonderful cover, but it's not a very good edition. The others are sharper. Ed Emsch, the great Ed Emsch, husband to Carol Emschwiller, father to Susan Emschwiller, who wrote Pollock, and really strange, interesting artist. And so anyway, there's so much fun to read these, not just because they're well written, they're well edited, but even Avram's descriptions of the writers. I always liked this part of F&SF for some reason. The descriptions of the writers and why they wrote their books. And I thought I'd just go breeze through this really quickly. There's this Damon Knight novel called The Tree of Time. That's what that's from. They would do serials, and this is it's almost like a A.E. Van Vogt novel that had been plotted, and the sentences were actually a little easier to follow because Damon Knight was actually a very smart and good writer, and it has a whole sorts of weird things. It's a guy who's forgotten 30 years of his life. It's really like it's like Players of Null A or something. He wakes up, and Damon Knight made terrific fun of Van Vogt, but he's doing a kind of Van Vogt novel here, and it's like legions of time and all sorts of weird things happening in it. And he wakes up and he realizes he's somehow part of some super race or something. I forget now, but I'm going to read the second half. I enjoyed it. There's a lot of it's also very well written. There's what's interesting about F&SF is they would have people. They didn't just have like most of the magazines do now, which is all the people that go to science fiction conventions. They would have people like T.P. Caravan. I don't think he's remembered at all. It turns out he's some sort of an academic, and he writes this really funny, weird story about a guy who wakes up as a cow in a slaughterhouse. It's a pretty horrific, funny little story. And completely forgotten. One of the fun parts of reading through this old year is that Avram picked pretty good stories. It's almost kind of keeping some of these writers alive when you read them. Another writer I used to like was Robert F. Young. I remember reading a few stories as a kid that I liked of his, and this was kind of a Ray Bradbury type story. A couple lovers go off to save the world. Pete Gets His Man. Pete Gets His Man by a guy, again, these one-offs by someone named J.P. Sellers. Kind of a cool little story. It's one of those, a guy who's a cartoonist, and he's writing cartoons about like a Steve Canyon type character, an adventure series. And as he writes the stories, the characters are coming into his life. I don't want to tell more than that. But it's really, every one of the stories in this is good. I would say this. And then you've got Avram writing the books section. And Avram would just read through so many different books. I mean, the guy, I don't know, he must have been able to just absorb books. And all of the different books, he doesn't just do the old, the stuff that's up for the Hugo Award that year. He picks a lot of strange and odd books. Some of the Case of John Darbell, Minister and Exorcist. And that's like a history book coming out of University of Florida. And the Man's in Space Dictionary. There's lots of science fiction, The Long Winter by John Christopher, but then there'll be, the 3 Martian novels by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Avram just would cover so many books. They're kind of fun to read, these little paragraph summaries. And then finally, there's Isaac Asimov used to write these science essays in there. And I really used to remember reading these as a kid, because I read a lot of F&SF as a kid, a little after Avram had already left. And his stuff really kind of gets you involved. Asimov had a real gift for kind of drawing you into a story, starting off with an anecdote, and then and basically the essay is just about how all the different planets in the solar system got their names. I don't know, I enjoyed it. I read all this in the bathtub. And finally, Avram would publish his own story sometimes, What Strange Stars and Skies, one of the most complex and lapidary and ornate short stories of his, which I read as a kid and sort of enjoyed more now, set in London around the turn of the century, and there's all sorts of odd things happening and all coming together, and Avram could bring together so much historical information and fantastic information and invent stuff. And it's a fun little story about kind of an alien invasion and a woman who's trying to do good in the East End of London. I really like that story a lot, especially now that I know probably the first time I read it, I'd never been to the East End of London, and now I've spent a lot of time in the East End of London. Anyway, there's you go. The first, I'm gonna over the next few years or decades, I want to read through this last year of Avram's fantasy and science fiction. They're pretty cheap out there, and they're kind of fun to read. And there's some. I didn't read a bad page in that magazine. Okay. Take care. More soon.